What happens when Hollywood's most legendary action hero faces off against one of daytime television's most outspoken hosts in a battle that nobody saw coming? In just 32 seconds, a simple question turns into an all-out war that ends with one of the biggest stars in movie history storming off the set of The View. This is the story of how it all went down. But before we get into the explosive details, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the confrontations they don't want you to see, and the drama that happens when the cameras are rolling. You won't want to miss what we've got coming up. Last night's episode of The View was supposed to be a celebration, a victory lap of sorts. Harrison Ford was there to talk about his latest project, to sit down with the ladies, share some laughs, tell some stories from set, and promote his new film to millions of viewers at home. It should have been easy. It should have been fun. He's done hundreds of these interviews over the years. He knows how they work. But within minutes of sitting down at that famous round table, the atmosphere shifted dramatically from friendly and welcoming to hostile and confrontational. And what happened next has absolutely everyone in Hollywood and beyond talking. It started innocently enough, like these things always do. Harrison walked out onto the set to thunderous applause from the studio audience, waving to the crowd with that signature half-smile he's known for, that slightly grumpy but charming expression that's become his trademark. He settled into his chair, adjusted his jacket, smoothed down his shirt, and the ladies welcomed him warmly with big smiles and enthusiasm. Joy Behar immediately cracked a joke about Indiana Jones and whether he could still run from boulders at his age, and Harrison gave that classic grumpy but charming response that fans have loved for decades. Something about how he never ran from the boulder ran from him. The audience laughed. Everything seemed perfectly fine. Everything seemed normal. Then Whoopi Goldberg leaned forward, and there was something different in her expression. Something the audience couldn't quite place yet. "So Harrison," she began, her voice carrying that tone she uses when she's about to make a point, "I want to talk about something that's been on a lot of people's minds. You've been in this industry for decades. You've worked with everyone. You've seen it all. And I think our audience would really love to hear your perspective on how Hollywood has changed, especially in the last few years." Harrison nodded slowly, clearly unsure where this was going but willing to engage. "Sure, yeah, it's changed a lot. Technology has completely transformed how we make films. The whole business side of things is different. Streaming has changed everything. The way audiences consume content now versus when I started, it's night and day." Right, Whoopi interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "But I'm not talking about technology or streaming services. I'm talking about the culture. The conversations we're having now about representation, about whose stories get told, about who gets opportunities, about who gets to be the hero on screen." The other hosts exchanged glances. This wasn't in the pre-interview notes. Sarah Haynes looked at her notes confused, and Joy Behar raised her eyebrows slightly. Harrison shifted in his seat, his expression becoming more guarded. "Well, sure. I think it's important that everyone gets a fair shot. I've always believed that. The industry should reflect the world we live in." "A fair shot," Whoopi repeated, and there was definitely an edge to her voice now. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "But Harrison, and I mean this respectfully, you've benefited from a system that for decades primarily gave those fair shots to people who looked like you. White men dominated the industry. They got the leading roles, the big budgets, the franchise opportunities. Don't you think there's a responsibility to acknowledge that?" The studio audience went quiet. You could feel the energy in the room shift. This was getting uncomfortable fast, and everyone sensed it. Harrison's jaw tightened slightly. You could see the muscles working. "I've worked hard for everything I've achieved, Whoopi. I've earned my place in this industry. I was a carpenter before I was an actor. I struggled. I auditioned hundreds of times. I got rejected over and over. Nobody's saying you haven't worked hard." Whoopi shot back, leaning further forward now, her elbows on the table. "But let's be real here. Let's be honest. The opportunities you got, the roles that came your way, the chances you were given to fail and try again and fail again and still get another shot, not everyone got those same opportunities. A black actor who failed twice would have been done. A Latino actor wouldn't have gotten that third chance. You know that's true. I didn't create the system, Harrison replied, his voice lowering in that way it does when he's getting irritated. Anyone who's watched his interviews knows that tone. I just worked within it. I showed up. I did my job. I tried to be professional. That's a convenient answer, Whoopi said sharply, and there was almost a dismissive quality to her voice now. The tension at the table was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah Haynes tried to jump in, clearly uncomfortable with where this was headed. Maybe we could talk about the new film and… No, let's finish this conversation. Whoopi cut her off without even glancing in her direction. Because I think it's important. I think it's crucial, actually. Harrison, you've played heroes for 40 years. You've been Indiana Jones, Han Solo, Jack Ryan, all these iconic American heroes. You've literally been America's action hero, the guy who saves the day, the guy everyone looks up to. And that's great. That's wonderful. But don't you see how that role, that image, has been part of a larger narrative that excluded so many other people, that told audiences that heroes look a certain way? Harrison's face was starting to redden now, that telltale flush creeping up his neck. My job is to act, Whoopi, to tell stories. I don't control what movies get made or who gets cast in them. I didn't run the studios. I wasn't the one making those decisions. I show up, I do my work, and I try to do it well. That's all any actor can do. But you have power, Whoopi pressed on, her voice getting stronger, more insistent. You have influence. When you're Harrison Ford, when you're one of the biggest stars in the world, you could have used that to push for change. You could have said, hey, why are all my co-stars white? Why are all the love interests white? Why does everyone in these movies look the same? But you didn't. That's not fair. Harrison's voice was rising now, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. You're making assumptions about conversations you weren't a part of, about things that happened behind closed doors that you know nothing about. Then tell us. Whoopi's voice matched his intensity. Tell us about these conversations. Tell us what you did. Are you seriously sitting here telling me how I should have lived my life? Harrison's voice rose even more. You don't know what conversations I've had, what battles I've fought behind the scenes. You don't know what I've pushed for privately, what stands I've taken when cameras weren't around. Then enlighten us, Whoopi challenged, spreading her hands wide. Please, tell us about all these private battles. I don't have to justify myself to you or anyone else, Harrison snapped, his face fully flushed now. I've lived my life with integrity. I've treated people with respect. I've done my damn job, and I've tried to do it honorably. The audience gasped at the swear word. This was live television, and things were spiraling out of control fast. The producers in the control room had to be freaking out. Whoopi didn't back down even an inch. Respect isn't enough when the system itself is broken, Harrison. That's what you're not getting. And here's the thing that really bothers me. The thing that really gets under my skin. You're sitting here. You're still getting the big roles. You're still the leading man in your 80s. While actresses half your age can't get work because Hollywood says they're too old. Don't you see the double standard there? Don't you see the inequality? That's not my fault. Harrison's voice was genuinely loud now, bouncing off the studio walls. I didn't write the rules. I didn't create the double standards. But you benefited from them? Whoopi shot back, matching his volume exactly. And you continue to benefit from them every single day. You're still working. You're still the star. While people who are just as talented, just as hardworking, don't get those chances because of how they look or how old they are or where they come from. Joy Behar tried desperately to interject her voice, almost pleading. Ladies, gentlemen, maybe we should all just take a breath here and… Stay out of this, Joy, Whoopi said without looking at her, her eyes laser, focused on Harrison. Harrison stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, with a screech that made everyone wince. You know what? I came here to talk about a film, to have a pleasant conversation, to share some stories with the audience. Not to be lectured about my entire career and my life choices by someone who thinks they have me all figured out after reading some headlines. Sit down, Harrison, Whoopi said firmly, her voice carrying authority. No, Harrison replied, his voice like ice, cold and sharp. I don't think I will. This ambush, this setup, whatever the hell you want to call it, it's complete and utter bullshit. Another gasp from the audience. Louder this time. The producers in the control room were probably having heart attacks. This was unprecedented. Whoopi stood up too now, rising to face him across the table, her posture defiant. It's not an ambush to ask you to take responsibility for your place in an industry that has systematically marginalized people for decades. It's called having a real conversation about reality, instead of just doing puff pieces where everyone pats each other on the back. Reality? Harrison laughed, but there was no humor in it at all. It was bitter, harsh. You want to talk about reality? The reality is, I've spent 50 years working my ass off, learning my craft, taking risks that could have ended my career, doing my own stunts that could have killed me, building something from absolutely nothing. And now I'm supposed to apologize for that? Because it doesn't fit your political narrative? Because it's not convenient for your worldview? Nobody's asking you to apologize for working hard. Whoopi's voice was rising to match his, her hands gesturing emphatically. That's not what this is about, and you know it. We're asking you to recognize that not everyone got the same chances, that the playing field wasn't level, that while you were getting your third, fourth, fifth chance, other talented people weren't even getting a first chance. I know it wasn't level, Harrison shouted, loud enough that everyone in the studio physically jumped. Several audience members put their hands to their chests. I'm not an idiot, Whoopi. I have eyes. I have a brain. I've seen the industry. I've watched it. I know what it's been like. But what exactly do you want from me? Seriously, what is it you want? You want me to give back my career? Return my money? You want me to stand here and beat myself up on national television? Is that what this whole thing is about? I want you to use your voice, Whoopi shouted back, her own face flushed now with emotion. I want you to stand up and say something that actually matters, instead of just collecting your massive paychecks and playing it safe and not rocking the boat. I want you to be the hero in real life that you've played on screen. Playing it safe? Harrison's face was crimson now, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. You don't know a damn thing about the choices I've made, or why I've made them. You don't know what I've said in private meetings with executives. You don't know what projects I've supported or championed. You don't know what young actors I've mentored. You don't know what people I've helped. You don't know anything except what you see on a screen and what you read in the tabloids. Then enlighten us. Whoopi spread her arms wide, her voice dripping with challenge. Please, by all means, tell us about all the wonderful secret work you've done behind the scenes that nobody knows about. I don't owe you an explanation. Harrison was practically yelling at full volume now, his voice echoing through the studio. I don't owe you anything. I don't owe this show anything. I don't owe the audience anything except an honest performance when I'm on screen. This is exactly what's wrong with this whole damn conversation. Everyone wants to tear down anyone who's achieved anything. Everyone wants to find fault, to assign blame, to make people feel guilty for being successful. It's exhausting. The other hosts were completely frozen now, absolutely unsure whether to intervene or let this nuclear explosion play out. Sunny Hostin had her hand over her mouth. Alyssa Farah Griffin looked like she might cry. The camera operators were probably getting the shots of their lives. This historic meltdown captured in high definition. Whoopi's voice was cold and sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. Success built on an unequal system is nothing to be proud of, Harrison. That's the bottom line. That did it. That was the final straw. Harrison reached up and ripped off his microphone, the sound of it thudding against the table echoing through the studio like a gunshot. The feedback squealed for a second before the audio engineer cut it. You know what, Whoopi? I've met a lot of self-righteous people in my time in Hollywood. I've met people who think they have all the answers, people who love to lecture everyone else. But you might just take the cake. Sitting up here on your high horse, judging everyone who walks through that door, acting like you've got the moral high ground on everything. At least I'm asking the important questions. Whoopi fired back, her voice sharp and defiant. At least I'm willing to have uncomfortable conversations instead of just coasting on past glory and pretending everything's fine. Past glory? Harrison's voice was dangerous now, low and threatening. Is that what you think this is? Past glory? You think that's all I am? I think you're an old man who's afraid to admit that maybe, just maybe, The world has changed and you're not willing to change with it. Whoopi's words were deliberate, calculated to wound. I think you're comfortable where you are, and you don't want to examine it too closely because it might make you uncomfortable. The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just been dropped. The studio was completely silent, except for the sound of the cameras still rolling, capturing every second of this disaster. Harrison stood perfectly still for a long moment, staring at Whoopi with an expression that was hard to read. Anger, certainly. Hurt, maybe. Disbelief. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but shaking with barely controlled rage. I've been called a lot of things in my life, Whoopi. I've been called difficult. I've been called intense. I've been called stubborn. But I've never been called a coward. Especially not by someone who doesn't actually know me, who's never spent 5 minutes with me off camera, who's making judgments based on assumptions and headlines. Then prove me wrong, Whoopi challenged, her chin raised defiantly. Sit back down in that chair and have this conversation like an adult. Show me I'm wrong about you. No. Harrison's voice was final, absolute. I'm done. This interview is over. I'm not doing this anymore. He turned toward the exit, taking a deliberate step away from the table. Harrison, wait. Please. Alyssa Farah Griffin reached out as if to physically stop him, her voice desperate. Don't, he said firmly, not looking back at her. Just don't. This is over. Are you seriously walking out? Whoopi called after him, and there was something almost taunting in her voice. You're just going to run away? That's your solution? Harrison stopped dead in his tracks. For a moment, it looked like he might keep walking. But then he turned back one last time, and the look on his face was pure steel. I'm not running away from anything, Whoopi. I'm walking away from a conversation that stopped being a conversation about 10 minutes ago. There's a difference. Maybe someday you'll figure that out. Maybe someday you'll realize that ambushing people on live television isn't the same thing as having a meaningful dialogue. Get out then, Whoopi said, her voice hard as nails. If you can't handle a real discussion about real issues, then go. The door's right there. Oh, I'm going, Harrison replied, his voice dripping with disdain. Don't you worry about that. Good, Whoopi shot back. Fine. Harrison's voice was sharp. I said fine, Whoopi responded. Harrison shook his head in disgust and turned on his heel, walking with heavy, deliberate footsteps toward the exit. The cameras followed him as he walked through the studio, past stunned crew members holding clipboards and scripts, past audience members with their phones out, recording every single second of this historic meltdown, their faces lit up by their screens and the studio lighting. You could see Harrison's shoulders were tight, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists at his sides. He wasn't storming out in a rage exactly, but there was a controlled fury to his exit, a deliberate quality that somehow made it even more powerful. This wasn't a tantrum, this was a decision. As he reached the door that led backstage, he paused for just a moment, his hand on the handle. For a second, it looked like he might turn around, might come back and finish this, might try one more time to salvage something from this disaster. But instead, he took a breath, pushed through the door with force, and disappeared from view. The door swung shut behind him with a bang that echoed through the studio. Back at the table, Whoopi was still standing, her chest heaving with emotion, her hands gripping the edge of the table. The other hosts looked at each other in absolute shock, their faces pale. The audience sat in stunned silence, nobody quite sure what they just witnessed or how to process it. Well, Whoopi finally said after what felt like an eternity, her voice still shaking with adrenaline. I guess we know where he stands now. I guess we all know exactly where Harrison Ford stands on these issues. Joy Behar tried desperately to salvage something from this wreckage. Her voice was shaky. Maybe we should take a break, go to commercial, let everyone... No. Whoopi cut her off sharply. No breaks. No running away from this. Let's talk about what just happened here. Let's talk about what it means when someone with that much privilege, that much power, that much influence, can't even handle a conversation about it. Can't even sit here and discuss these issues for 5 minutes without losing his temper and walking out. Sonny Hostin jumped in, trying to be the voice of reason. Whoopi, I think maybe we should all just... He walked out. Whoopi continued, not listening to anyone now, her voice getting stronger. Harrison Ford just walked out of this interview, because he couldn't handle being asked to think critically about his career in a broader context, because he couldn't handle being challenged. That tells you everything you need to know. That tells you exactly what we're dealing with here. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Alyssa Farah Griffin was visibly uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. The other hosts exchanged more worried glances, but Whoopi was on a roll now, the fire still burning bright in her eyes, her conviction absolute. We have to be able to have these conversations, Whoopi pressed on, speaking to the camera now, to the audience at home. We have to be able to ask these questions. And if people can't handle it, if they can't sit here and talk about it, then that's on them. That's not on us for asking. In the hallway backstage, Harrison Ford was already long gone, having left the building without speaking to anyone, without stopping for photos or autographs or explanations. His publicist was frantically making phone calls, trying to do damage control, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. The producers were scrambling, having emergency meetings, trying to decide how to handle this unprecedented situation. And on social media, clips of the confrontation were already going viral, spreading across Twitter and Instagram and TikTok at lightning speed, everyone with an opinion about who was right and who was wrong. But back in the studio, at that circular table on The View, Whoopi Goldberg stood her ground, absolutely convinced that she had asked the right questions, that she had pushed for an important and necessary conversation, even if it had ended with one of Hollywood's biggest stars walking out that door and probably never coming back. The show eventually went to commercial break. The producers probably made that call. The audience was still processing, still sitting there in shock. Some people were whispering to each other. Some were still recording on their phones. Some just sat there with their mouths open, unable to believe what they'd just witnessed live. What was supposed to be a friendly promotional interview, a simple conversation about a new movie, had turned into one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime television history. And it all happened so fast, escalating from a simple question about Hollywood's evolution to a full-blown screaming match in what felt like seconds. This wasn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This wasn't just a guest getting a little testy or a host asking a slightly uncomfortable question. This was a collision between two completely different views of Hollywood, two different generations, two entirely different ideas about responsibility and legacy, and what successful people owe to the world. And when those views crashed into each other at that table, under those bright studio lights, with those cameras rolling and that audience watching, there was only ever going to be one outcome: an explosion. Harrison Ford, the man who had survived snake pits and alien invasions and endless action sequences on screen, the man who'd done his own stunts and risked his life for his craft, couldn't survive 32 seconds of Whoopi Goldberg asking him to examine his place in Hollywood's history, to think critically about his success and what it meant in a larger context. Whether that makes him wrong, whether that makes her right, everyone watching will have their own opinion. Everyone will pick their side. But one thing is absolutely certain. One thing nobody can debate. Nobody who watched that confrontation will forget it anytime soon. It will be played and replayed. It will be analyzed and discussed. It will become part of television history. The question Whoopi asked hung in the air long after Harrison left the building. When you've been the hero for so long, when you've been the guy everyone looks up to for decades, what happens when someone asks you to look at the bigger picture? What happens when someone challenges you to think about your success in a way you've never thought about it before? For Harrison Ford, on that day, on that show, the answer was simple and immediate. He walked away. He removed his microphone, stood up from that chair, and walked out of that studio without looking back. And in doing so, whether he meant to or not, he left behind one of the most dramatic, most talked about, most unforgettable moments in talk show history. A moment that will be remembered long after both of them are gone. A moment that will be studied and debated and referenced for years to come. A moment that proved that sometimes even legends can't handle the heat